Quinn, and am the chair of the Scottish Brain Health Arc. Our logo and our mission statement is here. But essentially, one of the main things that we want to do in the Brain Health Arc is to develop and support people who are new to research or earlier in their research career to really try and realize their potential. And we're doing that in a number of different ways. One of them is what you've just joined. So we have a series of webinars. The webinar topics were chosen by ECRs. The one that you're joining today, hopefully you're aware, is getting a grant. When we made this advert, we had Sophie Roberts as our speaker. We're actually going to have Catherine Gray from Alzheimer's Society helping me today. And you can see that next month we have a webinar on starting out as a new lecturer. And then as we get closer into the summer, we've got a webinar on how you work with people that have lived experience. So hopefully see some of you at those webinars. All of the webinars are recorded and they're archived on our website. So I realize sometimes people can't make the webinar live. I'm particularly aware that this webinar falls during what's a holiday season for a lot of people. But I know from our website analytics that a lot of people engage with the content offline, and you're very welcome to do that. I also need to just update you on our BioHermes data challenge. So if you've opened any newspaper in the last 24 hours, you'll know that there are two big UK studies that are going to look at blood-based biomarkers for dementia. They are supported by Alzheimer's Society along with other funders, and they're going to be great, really important. But if you want to get your hands on some blood-based biomarker data right now, I've got some. We were given the data from a study called BioHermes, a North American study that looked at blood-based biomarkers of amyloid, tau, imaging, and lots of other things. And we've set up a portal that allows you to get access to that data to perform your own analysis. And even better than that, if you've got an idea, but you don't maybe have a background in analytics or data science, we've got some people that can help you. So officially, applications to get hold of that data finished at the end of the month, but we're allowing a couple of late applications to still come through because we've got a little bit of additional resource. So if you're interested in that at all, please go to our website. Details are on the slide there and submit your ideas. The last thing I want to tell you about, well, two last things, the last slide, is our seed funding. Brain Health Arc is a funder. We're not a major funder. The funds that we have are modest, but we do have a seed funding pot specifically to help people develop fellowship or grant applications. We also have a pot of money to help people travel to conferences, particularly if they're presenting at those conferences, and particularly if they're conferences that we are involved with. And we have contributed, along with other funders, to a more major grant funding initiative called the Scottish Neurological Research Fund. Details of all of these things are on our website. And I just want to finish by telling you about two meetings. In May, we're having a meeting that's a grant writing meeting around the interaction between brain health and lifestyle. That's going to be held in Glasgow. And again, details are on the website. And then a date for all your diaries. There's going to be a combined meeting of NHS Research Scotland Dementia, plus the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium, plus the Brain Health Arc. And that's going to be in the Apex Hotel in Dundee, 13th to 14th of June. We are open for abstract submissions and potential speakers. Details of that are on the SDRC website, and the URL is there. So if any of that sounds interesting, please go to our website, brainhealtharc.com, or follow us on the platform previously known as Twitter, that's now called X, or follow us on LinkedIn, or sign up to receive our newsletter. And there's a URL there that will allow you to do that. So I am going to stop talking there. Oh, a question has came in about the data. So the question about the data was, will people be able to access the BioHermes data at other times? And the answer is yes. the competition we ran was to get support from the Brain Health Arc. So to get statistical support and analytical support. And that is time limited because the staff that we have to offer that are time limited. But access to the data is going to be open throughout the year and going forward. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. And some other comments there just about the conference that I wasn't aware of, but I will note that and go back to SDRC. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing there. I'm going to just pause for breath for a second. And I see Catherine is now with us. Good afternoon.
Hello. Sorry, I was a bit late.
No, thank you.
Just to keep you on your toes.
double thanks for coming, because I do realise this is a holiday and it's holidays. So double thanks for coming along, and double thanks for everyone for joining the meeting live. So what I propose, if people are happy, is I'm going to give a talk. The talk will take maybe 25 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions. And that's where having Catherine on the call is going to be really helpful, because Catherine's here representing the Alzheimer's Society, one of the major funders of dementia research in the UK, and she can answer some of the more technical and process questions around applications and give you a bit of an insider view from being the other side of the table when it comes to grants and fellowships. Let me close my first set of slides and open my second set of slides. Just bear with me a second. Bear with me 2 seconds. I've got too many windows open on my desktop. You can tell I was trying to look polished. But we're almost there. Right. Okay. So let me share my screen again. And can someone just confirm that they can see the slide? I'm seeing nodding. Fantastic. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I'm Terry Quinn. I am a clinician and a researcher based in Glasgow. I chair the Brain Health Arc. I also chair the Scottish Dementia Research Consortium. So I'm involved in 2 organisations that are designed to help early career researchers. Today's topic was about grants and fellowships, but I had a couple of emails earlier in the year saying, could you really focus on fellowships? That's where people, really felt that they wanted a bit of guidance. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to major on fellowships. We're going to talk about aspects of grants in general. And what I propose to talk about are some introductions, a little bit about the prep that you need to do if you're thinking about applying for a fellowship, maybe talk about some of the magic ingredients, maybe have a think about why some applications aren't successful, and then have a look at an application, and then have a think about interviews as well. So really going from your initial thoughts that you want to apply for a fellowship right through to sitting at the table, being interviewed. We're going to cover the whole thing. So if we start with introductions, you know my name, but you might be saying, what right has this guy got to tell us about fellowships? Well, I've had to. So I was supported by the Stroke Association as a lecturer, and then as a senior lecturer, I was supported by the Chief Scientist Office and the Stroke Association. So I've got that. What is probably more pertinent is I have applied for a lot of applications and fellowships that I haven't got. I've had a lot of failed fellowship applications, but I've learned from all of them. And hopefully through some of that learning, I can share some things with you. I also sit on fellowship panels. So I sit on grant or fellowship panels for the Alzheimer's Society and the Stroke Association and the Chief Scientist Office and Northern Ireland Chest, Heart and Stroke. And I'm a fellowship reviewer for all of these other funders that have appeared on the slide, including some of the research councils, some of the other charities, and the NIHR. So hopefully I know a little bit. I wouldn't ever claim to be an expert, but hopefully I know a little bit about this topic of applying for grants and applying for fellowships. So with the introductions out the way, let's think about preparing the prep that's needed for a fellowship. And in a very tortured analogy, I'm going to compare preparing a fellowship to baking, because part of it is about getting the ingredients right. If you can get all the ingredients right, then your fellowship application stands a much better chance of getting through. If some of the ingredients aren't quite right, the whole thing can just collapse. Your cake may not rise. And what ingredients are we interested in? Well, the ingredients I'm going to talk about are peas, but not processed or marrow fat. These peas. You need to be thinking about your project. You need to be thinking about the people. And the people are you, but also your supervisors and the team and the environment that you're going to be working with. Related to that is the place. You need to think whether the university that you're working with is the right place to deliver what you're interested in. And that's the classical triangle of things that are usually considered when people are thinking about grants or fellowships. But specific to fellowships, there are some other bits. So if we make our triangle again, I want to add in the pitch. Now, this is more important for fellowships than for grants, and Catherine, feel free to disagree if you do disagree. But what I think as a reviewer and as an interviewer is you like to hear a story, particularly for a fellowship. You like to hear about how that fellowship has came to be, how the idea has came to be. And also there has to be something that's a hook in that fellowship that really gets people interested. And really that's about selling it. And so that's about the pitch. And then the other thing that I'm going to talk about a few times, because it's so fundamentally important, and this is important for fellowships and for grants, is you need to get your PPIE right. So working with stakeholders. And in the field of dementia brain health, we're really thinking about working with people who have lived experience of dementia or brain health. And if you're putting together a fellowship or a grant application and you haven't even considered that, you're off to a bad start. Catherine, would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. I think we often at the Alzheimer's Society talk about people, project and place, but I think that the addition of PPI we will still and add to will increase to 4 Ps, I think, because absolutely that's a sort of a really important foundation to your project and really adds credibility and ensures impact for your program as well.
I'm going to add in another P just to complicate things.
Great.
And again, this is specific to fellowships and not to grants. A fellowship isn't just about the science. A fellowship is about the applicant, and it's about them going to the next stage of their research career. So the fellowship also needs to make it very clear how that fellowship support is going to allow the person to progress. So there's our bunch of Ps, our ingredients. So once you've got the ingredients, you need to then think about, well, how much of each ingredient do I need? And I think people think of it in this way. They think, oh, it'll be about, a quarter of each. So, a quarter of it will be the project, a quarter of it the place, a quarter of the person, a quarter of the progress. That's probably not true, actually. Now, for project grants, a lot of the reviewing is around the project itself. It's around the science of the project, the feasibility of the project. The other bits are important, but as a reviewer or an interviewer, you're really looking at the project. For a fellowship application, it's different. For a fellowship application, it's all about you. And the applicant attracts the most marks. For those schemes where there are marks given for each of the bits, it's the person, the applicant, that attracts the most marks. And actually the project, while it's important, it's less important in a fellowship than, the right person with the right ideas and the right energy and the right enthusiasm. Okay. So continuing with this rather tortured analogy, let's think more about ingredients. So if you're putting together a fellowship application, what other things will you need? Well, I've got them all in this little recipe here. And let's go through them one by one. So you're going to need a funder. And you might think, well, I'll apply to the Alzheimer's Society, and that would certainly be a very good funder. No disagreement there. But it's not the only game in town. It's not the only funder in town. And in an increasingly competitive space for getting fellowships, I think you need to widen your options a little bit. So you could say, well, there are other dementia-specific funders, and there absolutely are, for example, Alzheimer's Research UK. But what I've tried to bring across in this slide is actually there's lots of other places that you could potentially get fellowship funding if you have a think about it. So research councils will offer it. They're not disease or topic specific, but they offer very competitive fellowships. Professional societies often offer fellowships as well. So, for example, on the slide here, I've got Association of British Neurologists, the Royal College, all of them offer fellowships. And although on this webinar, we're thinking about dementia and brain health, depending on your research question, it may be that your fellowship could be relevant to other funders. So, for example, if you have an interest in vascular dementia or vascular brain health, your project might be relevant to the British Heart Foundation. Or if your project has more of an interest in older adults, then it might be relevant to a funder like Dunhill. So really, don't put all of your eggs in one funding basket. Have a look around, because there are options out there. And the truth is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, even really great fellowships in a competitive market might not get funded first time. So you want to have a plan B and you want to have a plan C.
And I think on a practical level, it's worth looking, everybody has different deadlines as well. And I think that, certainly Alzheimer's Society now only have one deadline a year. So I think it's worth having a look ahead when you start thinking about applying for fellowships, to look at who could you apply to, but then secondly, when are their calls, when are the key deadlines, and just marking them out in the year ahead so that you know when to aim for, or how to position yourself across the year. And I think, yeah, absolutely, funders completely appreciate that you would be applying to more than one funder. And certainly we have a box on our application form that says, who else have you applied for? What deadlines do they have? Just so that we know, it's possible that we might lose this amazing candidate at some point in our review process. And again, the review process, which I'm sure we'll come to, will take time. And that's why, for example, we only have one deadline. Other funders are the same. So I think, it's worth having that future view, just so that you don't get caught out, think, right, I'm ready now for my Alzheimer's Society fellowship. And then you go on our website and you're like, oh, it's just closed and now I have to wait a year. So I think it's just having a future view once you start thinking about, even if you're not ready, just knowing what the next year looks like in terms of those deadlines.
And Catherine, while we're on that topic, because it's something I get asked, I think there's a bit of an urban myth that if you say apply to Alzheimer's Society, but say I've also put in an application to MRC, that counts against you. And I don't think that's true.
No, not at all. We would never see that as a negative thing. And, certainly from our perspective, all dementia research that gets funded is a win. It's more of an administrative thing for us in terms of, we just need to know if the MRC outcomes are in the summer and we're still reviewing your application. We just want to check whether you still want to be in our process and we're not duplicating effort. So absolutely, it's not seen as a negative thing at all. It's just, as I said, an admin point, just to make sure that you're still in our process. Because, obviously we commit quite a lot of time to reviewing those applications as well.
And then once you've chosen your funder, and this will seem like such an obvious thing, but a lot of people don't do it, have a look at what they're interested in. So you might think Alzheimer's Society, they're interested in dementia. Of course they are, but they have a research strategy. And there are particular things that they will especially want to support and fund. So spending 5-10 minutes on their website, having a look at the strategy, and then making sure that your fellowship is aligned with that strategy is definitely time well spent.
Absolutely. And, again, not unique to us at the Society at all, but, funders do shift on that strategy as well. And, there might be a perception that one funder does X and the other does Y. And, it's always worth checking, because I think, you don't want to rule out an option, or as you say, Terry, you don't want to sort of apply and then have got it wrong in terms of what that funder's looking for. So yeah, it's always worth checking what the current position of that funder is, because it does change. And perhaps historically your application might not have been in remit, but now it is. So it's definitely worth, just doing that due diligence before you start.
Once you've got your funder, you then need a bit of time. And I think people underestimate the time that's needed, particularly for a fellowship. So there's the time that's needed to write the fellowship, and in this little cartoon here, I've kind of compared the time it takes to write a fellowship to some other things like, some local small seed funding through to something like an EU Horizon project. The writing, takes, if you're going to do it properly, it takes a good few months, and you don't want to undercook that. You need to give yourself the time. And if we think about what that time involves, it's not just the actual sitting down with Microsoft Word and putting words on a page. It's all of these other bits that can take much longer than you might think, particularly things like getting your budget costed up. I know where I work, we're told that we have to submit fellowships 6 weeks before the deadline so that the budget can be properly worked up. And then if there are any approvals that you need to get before the funding, all of that can take time. So don't underestimate that, and don't think that the only time is just the time thinking up the science and putting it down on paper. And then related to that, you're also going to need some friends. And I'm not just talking about moral support. There are lots of stakeholders and people that need to be involved. And this is true for project grant applications and for fellowship applications. So it looks good if you've consulted the Research Design Service, if it's clinically focused research. You don't have to have ethics at the time of an application, but if there's parts of your project that maybe could be ethically problematic, it looks good if you've already had a discussion with them. If you're working with animals, again, there might need to be discussions about licenses. And then there's lots of other people as well. Are there research networks that it could help you to collaborate with? Are there collaborators outside of their institution that you need to get on board? And then there's lots of other people that will need to sign off your application. So, the head of your unit, your university finance, possibly your HR, all of these people. For some funders, they need ink signatures. That's less common now, but some of them still do require that. So all of that needs some time as well. So don't do what everyone does and leave this to the last day, and you're having to run around trying to get all of these signatures. Give yourself the time to get this stuff done, and you'll save yourself a stomach ulcer and lots of stress. And then once you've got that, the other friends you have to involve, and I'm maybe labouring the point a bit, but I'm labouring it because it's important, is you need to involve people that have lived experience. You need to involve stakeholders. And I think that works best if you do it at every single bit of the journey of your project or your fellowship. So from deciding on the research questions, engaging people that have lived experience of dementia can help you there, through to planning what the study might look like, through to running the study. And a lot of fellowships will have a lay advisory panel of 2 or 3 people who you just meet with maybe every 6 months or every year to talk about your progress. And then involving people with lived experience in the analysis, interpretation of the data, and the dissemination, I think is just good practice. And most funders will be looking for some evidence of that. And then, once you've done all of that and you hit submit, you've got to wait. And I also think people underestimate how long you need to wait. And this goes back to what Catherine was saying before about having a bit of an internal Gantt chart about when applications go in and when you'll hear the result. So if your submission goes in here, you've then got at least a few months while all of those applications go out to peer review. And I know getting peer review is getting increasingly difficult, and the time for peer review might increase as a result of that. And then for a number of fellowships, if there's an interview, there's then the time where the interview is organised. And then decisions aren't usually made on that day. They have to go to a panel, and then they have to go to a board to be ratified. You've got that as well. So if you're on funding that ends at month 8, and you've got no bridging, that's potentially problematic, because it's going to be several months from when you hit submit until you find out whether your application is successful or not. So again, you just need to factor that into your timing of things. Then the last thing you need, unfortunately, is a bit of resilience, because not every fellowship's funded, not every grant is funded. Most of my grants and fellowships haven't been funded. Some have, but the reality is most aren't. And actually, the whole thing can seem like a completely closed shop, because to get a fellowship, you need to be recognised as being a credible researcher that's got a future. And to be recognised as a credible researcher, you need to have some papers, some publications, and some esteem markers. And to get them, you need to have done some good original research. And to get original research done, you need to have a fellowship. And you can see it's like a vicious circle. How do you get in? It's tough. And I'm just putting this out there so we can all be aware of it. It is a tough gig to get fellowship funding. If you get it, fantastic, and you should be proud. But if you don't get it first time, that's okay, because that's true for most people. And if you don't get it, allow yourself to be annoyed, upset, angry, because you've put a lot into this. Particularly a fellowship is all about you. So when it doesn't quite work out, it's okay to be upset about that. Speak to people, speak to your supervisors, speak to your mentors, but do try and take any positives that you get from the feedback. And then, dust yourself off and get back in the saddle and try again. It took me four goes before I was able to get fellowship funding. And that's not uncommon. Okay. So
we've had a question in the chat. So 2 questions from Angelina. One, do researchers recycle fellowship applications? I would say I'm sure that they do. So is that similar to submitting the same manuscript several times until a journal accepts? I would say that, in the same way that I said it was definitely not seen as a negative thing, you applying to multiple funders, I would say that if you forget to go through and change the name of the funder in your application, it obviously, those are minor admin points, but it makes your application look much more professional. And also in terms of positioning to the funder, like we talked about with strategic areas that particular funders are interested in, it's not a case of just sort of changing the title and just submitting it again. You do need to do a little bit of work to make sure that you're tailoring to the call or to the funder that you're aiming for. But absolutely, we wouldn't expect you to sort of rewrite that application to us at the society versus, MRC, for example. We would absolutely expect that core fellowship to remain the same, but I think it's just how you top and tail it in terms of the writing and how you submit it. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Tim.
No, I mean, I would agree. So, I mean, of course, if you've put lots and lots of hours and blood, sweat, and tears into a fellowship application, it would be crazy to just, delete all of that and start from scratch, because there'll be lots of good stuff there. But, exactly as Catherine said, if you're submitting to another funder, make sure it aligns with that funder's strategy and vision, which means you will have to tinker with some bits. But the core is probably going to be the same.
Yeah. And then the second question is, are there secondary data analysis fellowships, i.e. that only envision analysing already collected data?
Yeah, I would say. So I don't know if Alzheimer's Society are going to keep their themes, but the theme that I'm part of in terms of being a reviewer is data at the moment. So, Alzheimer's Society certainly would accept applications that are principally focused on data. And there are data funders, HDR UK, for example, would only fund data science. So I wouldn't want people to think that fellowships are only about lab or, direct clinical research. Data research is definitely something that's increasingly getting funded.
Yeah. Okay, those are the 2 that we've got so far.
Fantastic. Okay. Why don't we talk a little bit about why some fellowships are successful or maybe unsuccessful. And we're going to go back to our P's now. So in your pitch, I said this before, you want to have a bit of a hook. You want to show that you can do this. So you want to show that you're building on strong foundations, but you want there to be some novelty there. A fellowship, maybe more than a project grant, can have an element of risk. Because at the end of the day, in the fellowship, it's the person that's being funded. So if they're funded to do a project and actually that project doesn't work, if they learn from that and they become a better researcher and they go on to become a research leader, that's still a successful fellowship. Whereas the same wouldn't be true of a project. And in a project, there'd be much more scrutiny of, is this definitely going to work? If we think about the project, also there has to be some pathway to impact. That's true for fellowships and for project grants. But the project in a fellowship, I think it looks good if it shows how that project is going to help your development. How is it going to help you learn new skills, topic-specific skills or generic skills? And it's also good if it looks like the project is going to generate some output. Funders like that, as well as it being good for your CV. In terms of the person really is fundamental for a fellowship application, and people will have, a long, hard look at your CV. A phrase that's often used in funding is a history of academic excellence, and that goes right back to your BSc. And what you want to show is you've taken all the opportunities that were presented to you to try and do things that show a commitment to research. So if you've got a CV that has a degree and that's it, that's not as impressive as someone that has their degree but has done lots of other things. Maybe they've been to conferences or they've been involved in other projects beyond their BSc, all of these things. I've put something here that I disagree with, but it comes up a lot, so let's talk about it. This concept of research mobility, which is a researcher moving from one university to another. There used to be quite a lot of emphasis on that. And certainly for some funders who will remain nameless, you could be at a panel table and they'd be saying, oh, well, this person's been in Glasgow their whole life. We're not going to fund them. I think that's a bit of a nonsense now, to be honest. You want to be in the place that's right for your research. And, if that means staying where you are, if that's right for the research, then that's absolutely fine. Not everyone shares my opinion. So in your application, if you are staying in one centre, you need to make it very clear that that's a research-driven decision. Your reason for staying there is because of research. We're all aware that life actually happens, and you might have lots of other reasons why you want to stay put. But for the purposes of your fellowship application, you want to show that it's a research-driven decision.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've definitely seen that debated at fellowship interview panels after candidates left before, and I'd agree, Terry. I think it's about the place that's right, and I don't think. I think you can make a strong argument either way for moving around and gaining experience of different environments versus staying in a place that's really invested in you and is really supporting your career development. So I think, as you say, it's just about addressing that in terms of this is the right place for me because of X and Y, and just addressing that in your proposal as to why it's the best place to support you and your longer term vision, and they're committed to supporting you in return, and how that works, rather than this is I've got this extensive CV with lots of different departments on it, I think.
Yeah, which takes us on to the place, and you do need to give this some thought, and this is true for fellowships and projects, but particularly for fellowships. Is the place the right place for you? Is it recognised for the kind of research that you want to do? And if it's not, then that becomes a much more difficult sell because you're then essentially starting that for yourself. What people also look at is the training that's offered. What you often see is there'll be a section on the application about the training, and people will cut and paste some of the text from the graduate school website about very generic stuff. You're not going to impress people with that. If you can show that you've sat down with your supervisors and you have, an individualized plan for how in your centre you're going to work with supervisors and mentors and other people to really develop your CV, that looks impressive. Part of the place is the team that's around you. And I think it's nice to see a bit of a mix. So having a really big name, a really famous supervisor is great. But the truth is, really famous supervisors aren't always around. They're often in the lounge at Heathrow, if we're being honest. So having maybe a really famous supervisor and someone that's maybe a bit earlier in their career is often a good mix. And then if you can complement that with some mentors that are maybe from another institution, that looks even better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think we've seen that in the past with applications where, again, the discussion afterwards is that X individual we know how busy they are, and that's a generic letter of support they put in, like how much, and it's often it comes from a place of concern for the fellow that individual is not going to get the support that they need, just because of the lack of availability from that potential supervisor. So I think also, if application forms often ask for letters of support to back up mentoring, or provide statements to say how you're going to work together. And again, I would, the more you can tailor that and make that specific to your training needs and your project and you as an individual, it's very obvious when a generic letter of support has been submitted, and it leaves room for the question of, is that person really invested in this project? How much time have they spent thinking about it and talking about it in advance? So again, appreciate people are busy and can't write you beautiful letters of support always, but again, perhaps you could draft one that they would be happy to put their name to and things like that, just so that you can really demonstrate the thought and time that's gone in to putting together that team, so that it doesn't look generic.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I hope no one is surprised at the concept of writing your own letter of support, because that happens quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm just calling a spade a spade. I think we know that happens, don't we? So, and if that person is happy to put their name to it, then you go. Don't do it on their behalf without them knowing about it. That's absolutely fine.
And then we don't need to go through PPI again. Hopefully I've convinced you that PPI has to be part of it. So if those are the things that get you a fellowship, what doesn't get you a fellowship? I'll just bring them all up, and I'll see if there's any things that I want to flag up. Well, here's one thing, and it's red flags on the CV. Now, I said before that people look for this thing of a history of academic excellence. If there are any things on your CV that maybe aren't so good, if you had to take a career break or anything like that, it's better just to be upfront about that. And just say, look, for a couple of years I wasn't very productive because X, and that's fine. But people will notice it, so don't try and hope that no one will see. If there are things like that, I think just be explicit about it, and people will be absolutely fine with that. And most of the things here are just the opposite of what I said before, so I don't think we need to go through them all again. What I would say, and that this is a kind of personal opinion, the fellowships that I see, certainly the ones that get through to interview, are all good. They're all really good. And the things that get you over the line are often, quite small things. And I'm going to put some stuff here, and you might think, why is he even telling us this? But it's because I've seen it. Get the formatting right. Make sure it's not full of typos and stuff, because it looks bad. And if you've got a field of, lots of really excellent science, little things like that just might pull you behind someone else. Catherine mentioned letters of support. A generic letter of support is really obvious. But if you have a letter of support that looks bespoke, and it looks like that person really knows you and is invested in you, that's impressive. And that use of generic text is something that just doesn't look good in any part of the application. So I spoke about just cutting and pasting the text from your graduate school about research training and putting it in. People are wise to that. They'll see it. So try and have something individualized. And just, again, I'm emphasizing this because it's important. Show that what you're doing is aligned with the remit and the vision of the funder as well, because that again can just be that little thing that just edges you ahead of everyone else. I've got a topic here and I've got no slides on it, but I've just put it here to remind myself, fellowships are not the only way that you can get a PhD or a postdoc. There are other ways of getting funding. There's less of it now than there used to be, but you know, departments and institutes have internal funding. And there might be other schemes that allow for funding. So we're all about talking about a fellowship here, and fellowships are great, and it's great to have one, but they're not the only game in town, and there might be other ways for you to continue in research that aren't a fellowship. And that's really all I want to say about that, just to make you aware of that.
And we've got a question not unrelated to that. It is, if you're not an early career researcher but in a more senior position, is it still recommended to apply for a fellowship?
So I can answer that then. Maybe actually, Catherine, you can answer it in terms of Alzheimer's Society. So there are different flavours of fellowship that would go from a fellowship that supports you to get your PhD or your MD if you're clinical, through to a fellowship that would take you as an early postdoc, through to fellowships, you know, maybe lecturer fellowships for when you're a little bit more senior, through to senior lecturer and intermediate fellowships. But if you're further up that ladder, right through to some funders offer fellowships at professorial level. So there is a fellowship for each stage of the career. What I found, and again, you know, Catherine, tell me if you disagree, once you've got one, getting the next one's that little bit easier. So if you've came from a fellowship, that looks good, and it just makes it that little bit easier to go into your next fellowship. But that doesn't mean if you've not had one, that it's a closed shop, because it absolutely isn't.
Yeah, I think, and yeah, absolutely. There are lots of different types of fellowships, different types of sort of funding grants. I suppose that another option would be a project grant application, potentially if you don't, you know, and that there's contract issues with who's the lead applicant because of, legal contracting with who can hold grants and awards like that with project grants. But a lot of funders do have the option to be a co-PI on applications for project grants, or there might be another option where you can still lead the project, but you do it in partnership with someone else in the department. So again, just exploring the funding websites to see what options are available if you can't find the fellowship that fits. And again, you know, asking the funder as well about that directly. You know, I can see you've got a project grant. Perhaps I'm ineligible because I don't have a tenured contract. What are my options? And actually, that, you know, there may be that possibility of being a co-PI or some other options available to you. So it's always worth asking that question directly of the funders if you're not sure.
Yeah, you know, and without creating lots of extra work for you, Catherine, that was something that I was going to say. My experience is funders like to hear from people. You know, if you've got a question about eligibility or remit or any of these things, ask it, and you'll get a response.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another question, another one from Angelina. Apologies for another question. No need to apologise. Can you take a fellowship to a new place? So is a fellowship application always written with an institution in mind? I suppose that comes back down to sort of why you have chosen the place that you've chosen. I think you can definitely take your idea to a new place or a new institution. It's just about embedding that idea, and you as a prospective fellow in that team, and sort of rebuilding that case for support, I suppose, around the place that you've chosen. But you know, you can transfer your idea and you as an individual, and it's just about recontextualizing why that place is the best one.
Yeah. So this is a genuine question, Catherine. If someone did want to transfer their fellowship, would that need to be reviewed again in any way? Or is that just a decision that
midway through? So if someone started at one place and they want to move, absolutely, we wouldn't stand in the way of that. We've got sort of no like blanket policy that's not okay. We often have grants that do move around. We recognise that researchers are individuals, and there's lots of reasons why people need to move institution. It's just making sure, you know, again, I suppose I'm only speaking on behalf of the Alzheimer's Society, but we really do see our researchers as individuals and people that we really care about, and it's not just about making sure that you fill in your progress report each year and that you do the science that you've said that you're going to do. We absolutely understand that you're individuals that need supporting outside of your research life, and if you need to move institution, it would just be a case, the only reason we'd be asking questions about that and making sure that there'll be a form to fill in to explain why and how you be supported, but that's about making sure that you as an individual will continue to get the support that you need to be able to deliver your project, and you don't end up in a position where actually you've become a bit isolated from your team, or you don't actually have the support from your new institution to deliver the project and to your potential as you had outlined in your original proposal. So absolutely, it's totally fine to do that. It's just it'd be making sure that you're still going to get the support that you need.
What I thought we could do now is just have a look at an application. So cover your eyes, Catherine, because it's a different funder. It's just one that I happen to have the PDF of. So this is Stroke Association. So this is their postgraduate fellowship application. But Quelle Surprise, it's all of these P things that I was speaking about before. So essentially, it's asking for you to pitch your idea, talk a bit about the place where you're going to be and why that's the right place, talk about how that fellowship is going to help you progress in your career, talk about the team that are around you. And actually, there's a couple of bits on this particular one about how the fellowship is going to help you progress in your career. So the last thing I thought we could talk about, because I know it's a source of worry for a lot of people, is for a number of funders, not for all funders, but for a number of funders, as well as the fellowship application, you may be invited to interview. Easy for me to say, because I'm now on the other side of the table, I think interviews are really useful, actually, for working out who's going to be the best fellow, and for just getting a sense of that person's enthusiasm and dedication and commitment. So I think they are useful, but I'm aware that they are stressful. But they maybe shouldn't be as stressful as you think, because I think the perception of interviews is kind of this, it's going to be very adversarial, and you're going to get asked questions that are, almost impossible to answer. And that's not the case. Well, certainly it's not the case for the Alzheimer's Society. Maybe for some other funders it might be, but not any of the funders that I've had experience of. Truth is, most of the questions at interview are kind of predictable. People are going to ask about your experience to date. The words they use to ask that might differ, but they're going to ask about that. They're going to ask about your future plans. That's a given. And it always surprises me when people aren't prepared for that. Of course they're going to ask about those things. Other things that you've got to be prepared for, and hopefully after this webinar you are prepared for. I think it's very fair you get asked, how have you involved people's lived experience? And make sure you can answer that. And the other thing is about, is this the right time for a fellowship? That comes up a lot, and I think people sometimes struggle to answer that. But it's an important question. Is it the right time for you? Would you be better doing a postdoc for a while before you apply for that fellowship? And then, although I said before that the project and the feasibility and risk mitigation isn't as important in a fellowship, it is still important. And you may well get asked, what are the risks that you anticipate, and what are you going to do about them? And then, of course, you're applying to a funder, so that funder might well ask, why us? And what they're really asking there is, have you taken the time to have a look at our remit and our strategy? Do you understand who we are? Because we're going to be funding you now for 3 or 5 years, and we want to work with you. So be ready for those. Be ready for all of those questions. And what do you do? I mean, practice these things. Any good unit or department will allow you to set up a mock interview. I think it's also useful to speak to people who have successfully applied for the fellowship that you're interested in. They'll be able to tell you what the interview was like. They'll be able to tell you some of the questions. No guarantee that those questions will get used again, but it'll give you a feel for what things will be like. You may or may not know who the research panel members are. You're not allowed to email them and ask them what the questions will be, and actually they won't know what the questions are until the day. But it can be useful to look them up. find out what they're interested in. And if they're interested in a similar field to you, be ready for that, because they might, ask you some very topic specific questions. Some funders offer this. I actually, and this is my bad, I don't know if Alzheimer's Society offer this. They offer the chance to come and just sit in on panel discussions. I don't know if you offer that.
We don't do it for interviews, and I don't think we do it for panel discussions at the moment. But it's something that we've talked about. But I don't think we've got a plan for that at the moment. But I know others do.
Yeah, some funders do. And I think just in terms of demystifying the process, that can be a really useful thing to see. Okay. So we have covered the prep, all of those P's, the different ingredients that go into fellowship, some of the reasons why fellowships might be successful or unsuccessful, a little bit about the application form, and a little bit about interviews. So I'm going to stop sharing there